Welcome to our third unit, the integumentary system, and this correlates with chapter 6 of our book in McGraw-Hill Connect. So we're going to be building on what we learned in Unit 2 on histology. Every single unit from here on out is going to draw on the histology that we learned in Unit 2. So I'm going to show you some real microscopic images of some tissues, specifically connective tissues. And you can pause the video and use your notes or any other resource and try to identify each, because we're going to be talking about epithelial tissue again and connective tissue. What tissue do you think this is? So this is an AI generated image here that's zoomed in, but here in the box, this is a real histology image. And I'm going to focus your attention specifically on these cells. So that is adipose tissue. And you might be thinking, well, how do you know? Okay, well, there's those large spaces that are filled with oil, and they push the nucleus of that cell off to the side. So let's try the next one. Okay, and if you need more time, pause the video. That is blood, and you know because we have separate cells that are surrounded by a fluid, and there was the erythrocytes, the leukocytes, and some platelets you could see in there. All right, pause the video if you need more time to think about this one. That is loose areolar connective tissue, and you know because you can see that ground substance and those collagen fibers going through the ground substance. There was also those reticular fibers that were branching and very few elastic fibers that were scattered in all directions. And there were those little tiny purple dots that were the fibroblasts. All right, what about this one? Go ahead and pause the video if you need to. That was fibrous, dense, regular connective tissue. And you know because there was many of those thick collagen fibers that were all lined up parallel and going in one direction. Okay, pause the video if you need more time to identify this tissue, but I want you to notice two structures. One being those lacuna, and the second being these fibers that are going through that hardened ground substance. So this is fibrocartilage. Hyaline cartilage wouldn't have those collagen fibers that are all running in one direction, but they would have those cells in the lacuna. Okay, pause the video if you need to spend more time identifying this tissue, but this is osseous or bone tissue, and you can see that central canal in the middle with the concentric rings called lamellae around them and the little osteocytes that are trapped in lacuna. Here's one that might take you a moment, but if you pause the video before I give away the answer. But what you're looking at, these purple dots, these are those fibroblasts. And these swirls are the collagen fibers. And notice that those collagen fibers are not arranged in a parallel pattern. So this is a fibrous, dense, irregular connective tissue. And you see those collagen fibers that are going in many directions. So we'll find this in places like underneath the skin, in the deep dermal layers, because it provides strength in many directions because we have that collagen swirled in many different directions. Okay, so that's going to bring us to our skin and our subcutaneous tissue, where we're going to talk about how the skin and We're going to relate the functions to the structures. We're going to have some more histology when it comes to the structure of the epidermis, the dermis, and some subcutaneous tissue. And we're going to look at markings on the skin. Your skin is a very large organ. It's actually your largest organ and it's your most vulnerable organ because it is exposed to the external environment, including radiation from the sun and from different things we come into contact with daily, chemicals, abrasions, and trauma. It actually does receive more medical treatment than any other organ. There is a very prominent field of dermatology, which is the study and medical treatment of this integument system. Your integument system consists of not just your skin, but also your hair, your nails, and the glands that are associated with those structures. Your skin covers about 2 square meters, which is pretty big, and composes of about 8% of your body weight. There are 2 layers of your skin. The upper layer of your skin is referred to as the epidermis. Epi means laid upon or covering. Dermis refers to the skin. And if you look at the histology of the epidermis, it is a stratified squamous epithelium, which means it's going to function for protection. The dermis is the deeper connective tissue layer, and there are 2 subcategories of the dermis that we'll talk about, and the type of connective tissue that is found in that layer. And below the dermis is the hypodermis. Hypo means below. That is not technically part of the skin, but we do usually study it with the dermis. If you've ever heard of a subcutaneous injection, sub means below, cutaneous is another term for skin, that subcutaneous injection is aiming for this hypodermis that is below the skin. Here we have a nice histology image of the layers of the skin. I want to note this hypodermis is much more below this. It's like below the picture. What you see in this area here is the deeper layer of the dermis. And then up here, that pushes upwards. This is a more superficial layer of the dermis called the papillary layer. So that light pink histology is a connective tissue. And the epidermis, that upper layer, is this darker purple stain here. That is a stratified squamous epithelium. Because remember, when we look at the cells at the apical surface, these cells up here, those are the long, squished cells. The layers of the skin are labeled in the following order, starting from the top, or more superficial, to the bottom, or deep. The epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. The hypodermis is really just subcutaneous fat, or adipose. Hair shafts are present in the epidermis, excuse me, but are rooted deep within the dermis. The following parts are labeled in the epidermis. If you follow along with me. We have hairs, right? And then there are also these sweat pores. And there is the epidermal ridge, which is here. Those are those projections that go up into the epidermis. They're layers of the papillary layer that push up and they actually form our fingerprints. And so though that dermal ridge acts like a zipper that holds the epidermis down, gluing it to the connective tissue down below. So that dermal ridge is essentially made up by reticular fibers that are coming up from the papillary layer of the dermis and forming the basement membrane of the epidermis from the layer up above. You're also going to see some touch receptors that are called tactile corpuscles that are found in this layer, like what we see here. So those guys detect light touch. And there are also blood vessels that are going to deliver nutrients to the tissue around it. And remember that the epidermis, being a stratified squamous epithelium, means that it is avascular. So as the tissue moves up and away from that basement membrane, it is going to lose contact with those blood vessels, and it relies on diffusion in order to get its nutrients and get rid of its waste products. So as the cells in that bottom layer are doing mitosis, they're pushing the cells above them up and away from that nutrient supply, causing them to die. Some things you're also going to see in the dermis, but a little bit deeper, are some hair follicles and some glands known as sebaceous glands. So sebaceous glands here, you can see that they empty into that hair follicle. And then we also have sweat glands. So there are these little sweat glands that have the convoluted tubules that are located very deep in that dermis, here and here. We'll talk about those two kinds. There are what's called eccrine that go directly up to the surface, and there are apocrine, which divert into a hair follicle. And then we're also going to have the hair bulb here, which is where the hair has cells actively dividing to form the hair. And then they're going to get pushed up and out of the hair follicle, going away from that nutrient supply. And we're also going to find some Pacinian corpuscles in about this layer here. So this is also being called lamellated corpuscles, and these are pressure receptors. So if somebody pokes you or starts to apply some pressure on your skin, these are the guys that are going to detect that pressure, and they're going to send the signal to your nervous system as a sensory nerve. And then deep in that hypodermis, that subcutaneous fat, we're also going to have blood vessels, sensory nerve fibers, and motor nerve fibers. When it comes to your skin, its thickness is going to range. The thinnest skin is going to be found on your eyelids, which is only about half of a millimeter thick. A millimeter is about the length or the thickness of a mechanical pencil lead. And the thickness ranges mainly due to a variation in the thickness of the dermal layer. But skin will be classified as thin or thick based on the layers that are found in the epidermis. Thin skin is going to cover the entire body, and it's going to have structures like hair follicles, sebaceous glands, and sweat glands, while thick skin is only going to be found on the palms of our feet, the soles of our palms of our feet, the palms of our hands, the soles of our feet, and the corresponding surfaces of our fingers and toes. The thick skin found in these locations does have sweat glands, but there are no hair follicles or sebaceous glands. And the epidermis is going to be thicker in these locations because there's going to be a thickened outer layer called the stratum corneum, which we'll go over those layers in a minute. When it comes to the functions of the skin, your integumentary system is going to work very, very closely with the skeletal system and the endocrine system to keep your body within very narrow limits when it comes to body temperature and regulation of your hormones. So, some of the functions, if we think about the anatomy of the skin and the outer layer being a simple squamous epithelium, that is going to allow for protection. And that protection is because of the barrier that this simple squamous epithelium provides, but also some of the things we're going to talk about when it comes to the proteins that are produced in the skin, some cells that we find in the skin, and some of the changes that happen within the epidermis. We also find structures within the dermis that allow us to detect things like temperature and pressure and pain, or even little tiny insects that are walking on our skin. We're going to be able to help regulate our body temperature and stay at a nice 98.6 degrees because of our sweat glands. And when we sweat, that sweat will evaporate off and cool our body. We also have lots of blood vessels in our dermis, and by diverting blood flow to a very large organ that will draw the blood near the surface of the skin and surface of the body, and that will help cool the body back down. Some things can also be excreted through our sweat, and with the help of some ultraviolet light that we get from the sun, we actually produce our own vitamin D. And vitamin D is essential for making certain hormones. That stratified squamous epithelium of the epidermis, just because of the anatomy, has an inherent function for protection. Those really tightly packed cells and having many layers act like sandbags in a storm. They're going to be able to block anything trying to get into the body. So there is like a physical barrier between the internal and the external environment of the body. And also being many layers, that is going to provide protection to the deeper layers if there is any kind of trauma, or even if there is a skin infection, an infection on the surface of the body that can get isolated from the rest of the body. We also have cells that are resident in that epidermis that act as first responders or dispatch operators to notify the rest of the immune system if there is some kind of infection that has breached the first line of protection. These cells also secrete proteins like keratin that hardens and provides a hardened physical protection, and it also is the same protein that we have in our nails and our hair. Other proteins are things like dermacidin and defensin. This is essentially an acid mantle in our skin that provides a protection against bacteria from getting deeper into the body. There is also connections between the cells of the epidermis that create a barrier of water and prevent water from leaving the body because we need to keep the water inside of our bodies. There's going to be vitamin D synthesis that happens in our skin first. And we have many, many nerve endings that can help us respond to various stimuli, like thermoreceptors that detect temperature, mechanoreceptors that detect touch and pressures. We will have that thermoregulation, which can constrict or dilate our blood vessels that will alter the blood flow, ultimately releasing or retaining heat. And there's also nonverbal communication. Our facial expressions are because of our skin that is connected to the muscles that is down in a deeper layer. Since skin is connected to those deeper muscular layers, they are integral in nonverbal expressions. And I'm going to stop the video here and we'll talk about the layers of the dermis.